Right, next question. I got sent another question asking, why is it called the Bulldogge Podcast? For me, it was pretty self-explanatory. But why did you call it the Bulldogge Podcast? Particularly because you breed Staffordshire Bull Terriers. So, the easiest way, in fact, we'll go way back. Way back. Picture me as a young tearaway in the UK. I was, again, another story for another time. There's always stories. There's backstories, stories, histories. Let's just say I was, to my own devices, living from hand to mouth, couch surfing, etc. 16 years old. I was boxing. I was working. I was ducking and diving, doing whatever. Anyway, as all young scallywag tearaways end up doing, or used to do, I think it's probably changed now, I decided at 16 years old I was going to go and get a tattoo. Now, you've got to be 18 to have tattoos in England. But there's a particularly notorious place in the UK called Boscombe. Boscombe is known as Little Liverpool. Little Liverpool is where all of the Scouse lads in the 80s and 90s used to come down to the seafront and they could claim their unemployment benefit on the seafront and they could live in bedsits. And, if you're going to draw your unemployment somewhere, why not have a bit of sun and sea and sand? So it was notorious, this place called Boscombe. Now, there's a road, a very famous road called Palmerston Road in Boscombe, and there was a tattoo shop there, and it was called Ray's. And Ray was the tattooist. Now, it was such a colourful place. Ray used to have Big Ray, who was a bouncer, on the door. Imagine, you have a tattoo shop with bouncers. So, Big Ray was a Hell's Angel. And he, long beard and never smiled and was very, very grumpy and very volatile. So, I turn up at Ray's and I'm hoping that Big Ray might not be there, but he was. And he looks at me, looks me up and down. He says, "What do you want? What do you normally want if you go to a tattoo artist?" And I said, can I come in? He said, "You 18? I went, trying to deepen my voice a bit. Yeah, I'm 18. And he looked at me and just shrugged and went, "Go on," and let me in. And then he re-blocked the door again. Now, the reason for Big Ray was because there was lots of pubs. And people used to get pissed, go and think, well, let's get a tattoo. That would be a good idea. They go to Ray's and they wouldn't have enough money. So then Big Ray would basically batter them and take what money or objects they had, as a sort of as a récompense. So it was one of those places. So anyway, I go in, and what do I see? I see this big army type sat in the chair weeping. He was a big, strong, squaddy type, biceps, and this guy was weeping. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? Too late. You're in. Big Ray's blocking the door, and now you've got to look interested. I'm looking at all these images on the wall and thinking, oh God, what do I want? And Ray, who's smoking, there was no sort of, there's the health and whatever guide at the time. Cigarette in his mouth, squinting his eyes, tattooing the guy who was sobbing. And he looks up and said, "You found anything of interest?" And I said, "Well," and I was looking at a swallow or something. He said, "That's for girls." And I'm like, yeah, I know, I was just looking. And then I swung around and there was a patriotic table of artwork. And there was a big bulldog sat on a Union Jack. And I said, "I'll take that one." And he said, "All right, you're next." Anyway, so I'm sat there watching this poor squaddy sobbing. He's having a big dragon done. And I'm thinking, this is just typical. What seems like a good idea, I'm just going to come up stuck. Anyway, funnily enough, it wasn't actually that painful. Ray was a complete artist and it was done in a very short space of time. And that was my first tattoo, a bulldog. So, fast forward many, many, many years. I've been in Paris, I've been running bars in Paris, I've been up to Holland, and I'm back down in Marseille now. And what it was in the mid to late 90s was the Irish pub craze. It was the O'Malley's, O'Brady's, O'Sullivan, anything. So everything was the crack, everything was Guinness, everything was Irish. Now, I had in my mind, I wanted to do my own bar, pub type sort of little establishment. So what you need is when you decide this is what you want to do, you have to get a pen and a paper and you have to start putting all your ideas on paper. So the first thing was identity. Now the identity, I was an Englishman in Marseille, and I was already known as L'Anglais, the Englishman, because, you know, they can't be bothered to learn your name or whatever. He's just the English fella. So I was already known as the English fella. Okay, so if you like the English fella, immediately that sets me apart from the others. You know, there's not 1,000 English people down there, probably now, but back in the day there was very few English. So I was a novelty, the English fella. So I'm thinking, well, the French are very patriotic. If you watch the rugby and all the rest of it, they've always got the cock, you know, with the rooster with his head held high and his chest puffed out. And I thought, the national symbol of Great Britain is what? Well, it's the bulldog. Winston Churchill, bulldog. Victorian times it was John Bull, the stout chap with the waistcoat, Union Jack waistcoat, and his bulldog. And I thought that all fits in nicely. That speaks to me. So I started putting pen to paper to do my first establishment, which I was going to call the Old Bulldogge. But the Old Bulldogge, written sort of Shakespearean, with an E and a double G-E. So the Old Bulldogge. And so that's how I set it out. And then my logo is a remix of the John Bull type thing, which I copyrighted and had it all put together. And so my first establishment was called the Old Bulldogge. It was an instant success. I mean, it was, again, I'll do another episode on the highs and lows and how I managed to get, just by sheer pig-headedness, how I got investors, how I got interest, how I got backing, how I found a place, the coincidence, the serendipity, whatever. When I was in X many years before, I used to walk everywhere at night with the dog, and there was all little fountains everywhere. And I remember going up onto this little place which seemed untouched, and there was a big fountain. I used to sit there with my dog, and I remember looking at, there was a sort of crappy restaurant, and I remember thinking that would make a good pub. And there was another little tiny restaurant a little bit further down. I thought this, many years later, as fate would have it, this little corner of Aix-en-Provence would become mine. So we started with the Bulldogge, the Old Bulldogge. It was such an instant success. Within 2 years, I bought the big restaurant opposite, which I called the Bulldogge and Barrister because it was opposite the law courts. So the logo was a bulldog with the wig and the hammer and the black overalls. So I had the Bulldogge and Barrister as well. I bought a shop down the road because I was always, still breeding. And I called that the Bulldogge Boutique. So that was I had a secretary in there. I had, these were the days of fax machines and all that. So I had the Bulldogge Boutique. Then I flipped the Bulldogge and Barrister to a music bar, which I called the Bulldogge Unplugged. So I had lots of establishments, and I became known as, Mr. Bulldogge, the Bulldog guy, the English fella. So that was going back 2002, and I ran that straight through to, I think I sold up in 2012, 2013. So I had a good run. And again, another story, people have asked me, why did you sell up? You had all these businesses, and, why did you sell up? Another long story, which I'll address, but it's always complicated. I mean, you have a dream, this is what I want, and then when you get it, you think, well, I'm bored now. What else can I do? And life's short, and I'm one of these people that wants to create, wants to move on, wants to inspire, have fun, adventure. And so, I very quickly was fattening a lot of people's pockets, except my own. So, I decided, well, you know what, I've been there, done that, proved a point, as I often do. Now on to the next thing. So this is why when I sold up everything, I was doing I think it was a blog, the Bulldogge blog spot, I think it was called, for some German friends. And I had stories. They were asking me about stories and bits and pieces. And I had a version in French, in English, and in German. And it got a little following. And one thing and another, I'd just met my missus, which is now my wife. And she quickly fell pregnant. And with all that, I stopped doing the Bulldogge blog spot. I put it on hold for a minute. And then I had, my boy came along, Sean, and then all the sort of everything that goes with it, and reorganizing life, and if you like, the Bulldogge blog spot was on hold, and I was still breeding. And I actually, when I sold up, I went into consultancy, and after consultancy again, I was just a bit sick of corporate business, and I wanted to do my own thing. So I went full time into breeding. And always had the Nightwood Oak, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, the Sporting Bulldogs, always that sort of, the logo. And finally, I got pressured into coming up with a podcast, because I get many questions every morning. When I get up early, the first thing I do is I feed the dogs, I make sure everybody's all right. And when I get some peace and calm at maybe 5 a.m, hot coffee, and check my messages. And I get lots of messages from all over, and a lot of it was down to the podcast I did with Sean O'Brien. Sean O'Brien, which has got a similar name, is called the Bulldogge Social Club. Sean O'Brien, we had a chat, and it went viral. I don't know how many clicks, likes, or whatever you call it went to, but I started getting messages. The inbox would just be full of, from messages from Ecuador to New Zealand to Australia. People sending me questions and stuff. Love what you do. Love your dogs. Would just wanted to ask you. And so, I would answer and answer. So finally now what I do is I try and note down all the queries and the questions and the curious that people have. And I've taken the bull by the horns, started the Bulldogge Podcast. And I'll do my best to answer one after another. And then what I'll do later, I got contacted yesterday by an old friend, Matthew, who had the DLO kennels. And Matthew, again, he's a little bit like stonemasons. He's kind of taken his foot off the gas for the minute. He's not breeding now. He's got lots of projects going on. Anyway, he said, listen, man, I've been watching your podcasts, been listening to them, love it. We've got to get together to do an interview. So that's going to be coming up, and that will be in French. So for the French people that are interested, that one will be in French. Sean O'Brien, again, I've said to him, I'll do another one for you. But again, since we spoke, I mean, I've got kids popping up left, right, and centre. So I'm up to 3 kids at the minute. So, life is speeding by, and I'm trying my best to sort of catch up. So Sean, I'll get in contact with you. Matthew, I'll do your thing as well. And I'll go about answering the questions I've got, and then I'll start telling a few stories and bits and pieces. And then I'll also try and get this editing thing down whack. And when we go for hikes and walks in this beautiful part of the world, I'll start showing you, some bits and pieces. And we'll take it from there. So how long's that been? We're up to 15 minutes again. So that's a question of why the Bulldogge. The Bulldogge was the Bulldogge concept, which I started in 2000. In 2000, I put that business plan together, and it's been with me ever since. So you could say 26 years of history, and it all coincides with the first day I walked into a dodgy Ray's tattoo parlour at 16 years old and got the first scratching on my skin, which was that of a Bulldogge. So hope that answered your question. Now let's get on to the next one.